Well, let's get into this. Welcome. We're back for another episode of the podcast. Yeah, I'm really excited because you got somebody here that I'll say is a very a man that we all respect here in the media ministries department. Not just as a leader, as a pastor, as a servant of God, but also just as a person. Somebody that's like very I would say relatable. And just a person that at least I feel, and I'm pretty sure we all feel the same way too. We feel that sees us just as people, as friends, as equals, I would say. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I'm really excited to have you on the episode.
I'm excited to meet that guy too. When's he coming? Thank you so much for having me. I count it as a privilege and an honor, and excited to be part of this amazing work you guys have been doing.
Yeah, cool, awesome. Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, since you've been here, it's been great, man. It's been able to just really feel encouraged. I feel like you always take the time out to stop by our cubicles and just talk, talk shop. Also just talk barbecue. That's and then just ask, what's been Jesus, been speaking to us and talking to us. So really do appreciate that. Yeah, it's been great. So yeah, for this episode, it's going to be a good one. I think so. I've been thinking a lot about essentially, leadership, church leadership, but not just within the church, just in general, like in life, trying to look at, what makes a leader, what are some good qualities of leaders, that type of thing, specifically as it relates to like the church, because there has been so many, as of the last, 5-10 years or whatever, there has been so many people that have been leaving the church, they've been exiting out. And then, one of the reasons is, as a result of leadership, maybe they felt they haven't been led well or different things, different issues. So we want to just kind of take a look at that, look at what are some good qualities, some things to look out for, a bunch of stuff like that. So I think it's a really good topic.
Yeah, I'm loving it. I'm excited to get into it. Leadership is something I think that's been coming more and more to the forefront of the minds of people, and again, whether it's in the business sector or in the church, or with the Salvation Army, we have the benefit of that crossover, right? What does leadership look like? What does it require? And that continuously evolves, and so the conversation evolves with it. People expect different things, they need different things, and it's the attentiveness to that we're able to have that makes a difference between what's considered, quote unquote, a good leader or an emerging leader.
There we go. Yeah. I like the way you put that. An emerging leader. Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. Okay, so check this out. Before we get into this topic, I got a question for you.
Let's go.
Okay, so we're gonna pull something up right here on the screen. Talking with you, I know that you're a big movie guy.
Yep.
A movie buff. So this is a list of top 10 movies of all time. So we're gonna go ahead and read them through, and I want you to tell me if you think this order kind of makes sense to you, if there's some things that you're like, some movies that you're like, that wasn't that great, right. We got to, take it down the list a little bit more. And then maybe you can tell me if there's a couple movies that you would put up there.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So here we go. The first one, top 10. This is according to ER, that guy.
Yep.
All right. So number 1 is The Godfather.
Okay.
The Godfather, 9.2 stars out of 10. Next up, we got The Shawshank Redemption.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I still haven't seen it. Yeah,
really?
I know.
Come on.
Yeah. Number 3 is The Godfather Part 2.
Yeah, I'd swap 1 and 3.
You would swap 1 and 3?
I'd put Godfather 2 right off the bat, up top. Above Godfather, the original.
Okay.
That's just me, though. But yeah, I like this list so far.
Okay. Number 4, we got Inception. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a very good mind-bending movie.
Christopher Nolan, he's a genius.
Yeah. Chris. Yeah, yep. And you'll see a trend here as we start going down. You'll see a trend here. Number 5, we got Fight Club. Mm-hmm. Another crazy psychological
so
thriller.
Good.
Yeah. Next up, we got The Dark Knight.
Okay.
Yeah. And number 7, we got 12 Angry Men. I've actually seen that one. Yeah,
you've seen that one.
I've seen that one.
But not Shawshank. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I saw that one in I forgot what class it was, like an English class or something like that. 12 Year Men, the OG one. All right, number 8, we got The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. Number 9, we got The Matrix, the first one, and then number 10, we got 7.
Ooh, yeah.
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 So really quick, tell me, what are your thoughts?
So it's a half solid list. I think all of this is subjective, right? So I like the way it started. I think the list got a little lazy towards the end.
Okay.
I do agree 12 Angry Men. I wouldn't have put it up there initially because I wouldn't have thought too much about it until I saw it there. I think it makes sense. Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, solid movie, solid trilogy, not in the top 10.
Yeah.
Matrix, on the line of top 10, and probably not. 7, brilliant. But I think there's some other ones I would throw up there that are not up there. These are a couple sleepers I think people don't pay enough attention to because there's depth. Before I jump into that, Dark Knight, Heath Ledger, easily top 10 performance.
Yeah.
And again, Christopher Nolan, right? David Fincher did a great job on Fight Club. I think there was a brilliance there. I'm sure everybody's seen it, so I don't feel like I would give away anything to talk about it. But
there's no spoilers here.
There's no spoilers on that. I think, Ed Norton, that's his second movie that I'm aware of where we talk about multiple personalities. And he played that role in just in a brilliant way. But what's missing, and there's a lot of Christopher Nolan up here too, which is really cool.
That's the trend I saw, yeah.
I think what's missing is things like Robin Williams in Bicentennial Man.
Bicentennial Man, okay.
Layers and layers in that movie of themes that circle around the things that we care about, the things that we are concerned about in life, about the perspective from which you get to see life, the issues about. He really jumps into this issue about slavery, and not in the sense of American slavery per se, but what are we tied to when we wanted to find freedom from it, and about love and things like that. That's a really great one. I would highly recommend Bicentennial Man.
Bicentennial Man, okay.
And then there's another, I think that should be up there, The Green Mile.
The Green Mile, okay.
Like, every so often, Stephen King does something that's not a horror movie.
Yeah.
And The Green Mile, beautiful story. And I don't know that he's a person of faith. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's an atheist.
Yeah.
Don't know for certain. But if I remember correctly, he's not a person of faith. But that movie, if ever there was a movie that didn't say the word Jesus, that was about Jesus.
Yeah.
The Green Mile was
one.
about the Jesus story.
Yeah.
You have you seen that?
I've seen The Green Mile, yeah.
Right? So
I've seen The Green Mile, yes.
You have this character, John Coffey, who was in prison for something. He was in persecuted for something he didn't do. He came and everybody he engaged with, he healed and restored them in one way or another.
Yeah.
His name was John Coffey, initials JC.
Yeah,
right?
It's there, yeah.
And there's a lot there that, maybe it was all coincidental, but I found it to be brilliant.
Yeah.
At the end, the Tom Hanks character, as well as Mr. Jangles, the mouse, based on their encounter with John Coffey, ended up with extended life. I wouldn't say eternal life, but they had an extended life because they had received this grace experience with the character. But that's another one I think should be up there. Okay. There's a few others we could name, but those are. It's a solid list that you have there.
It's
still.
a good list. Yeah. This is like you said, it's subjective for sure. Although I will say there are some movies that I think across the board, like stand out. I think they're like objectively like. In that list. Obviously, like you have like the Godfather series.
The Godfather series is again Godfather 1. I'd put 2 up there. I could even take 1 off the list.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And add something else, but 2 was solid.
Yeah. What I love about those the older movies is that like they're longer movies, but they really take the time to tell a story. You know what I mean? To really like kind of build out the characters. And if you have the patience for it, to kind of sit down, like you'll see some really, really good art.
Okay, so really art going on. No movies with Denzel on the list, right? Like,
oh man, yeah.
Denzel alone's a top 10.
Yeah, for sure.
His Spike Lee's Malcolm X. You forget you're watching Denzel Washington, right? Yeah. And I know this is not a podcast about movies, but I just had to bring that out too. Yeah. His role in Glory. The whole movie Glory, but Denzel's in Glory.
That's the Civil War movie, right?
Yes. Yeah. What's the first one he won an Oscar for?
Was it Training Day?
Training Day.
Training Day, yeah.
He had to be the bad guy to win an Oscar, but he won an Oscar for Training Day.
That one's wild because it's believable, and you're just like, man, it's like so different than all of like a lot of his other roles. So, that's where I guess you really do see the art, right? The artist, at work. Yeah. Yeah, just kind of pivoting to what we're here to kind of discuss, like I said, we're talking about this whole like idea of like leadership. You mentioned some of it already. You already kind of like connected some of it in terms of like movies, to good leadership and whatnot. But yeah, I kind of want to hear from you and just kind of see if like you can kind of shed some light on this whole idea. Like I said, specifically as it relates to church, we do, we do have people that God has put in place, to kind of, to guide the community, to guide the church people. And it's a huge, kind of responsibility. But also like within our everyday life, leadership is really just a part of everything, whether it's work, everybody has a boss, everybody has somebody that they have to answer to, whether it's at home, different people play different roles in terms of leadership, in terms of, guidance of family, et cetera. So it really is just a part of our everyday kind of existence. So as a result of that, we just want to look at like, what are some different types of leaderships that you're like, leadership styles that you're aware of, and even like types of leaders, because there's also some differences as it relates to that as well.
Yeah. So I think, I don't know that I would necessarily want to discuss it in terms of like leadership styles or leadership types from this kind of typical description, because I think it goes so much deeper than that. Not to take away from your question, I just think as we dig into it, we need to dig into the root, right? So the root of these issues then creates the results about, are they assertive or are they laissez-faire style of leadership or what have you. But really, as we dig into that, I think we have to go a little further back. And what are we trying to accomplish? What's the true motivation behind what turns out to be our leadership styles and types? One of those things I think is so important for leaders is to figure out, whether it's in the church or whether it's in the business sector or what have you. I think the first thing that a leader would want to make sure that they grasped and communicated is this concept of, how do I provide meaning to the people that I'm leading, right? Because that's how you create buy-in. That's how you create the sense of connection, and dare I say a sense of commitment. And when they follow the leader, it's in part because the leader is who they are, but I want to believe that somebody believes in the mission of something, and so they're following the mission, but they're being led by the leader to accomplish the mission. And so we want to know that as a leader, we want to provide this sense of meaning or meaningfulness, structuring things in a sense that people who are involved have a high motivating potential, something that drives them. What is going to drive them forward? And I need to know that about anybody who I'm leading, anybody who's choosing to follow my direction. Do they see within me something that drives them? Are they being challenged? Am I providing opportunities for them to have some sense of autonomy in the things that they're passionate about? Am I driving them to achieve their goals and at the same time accomplishing the overall missional goals? Right. And so we can look at that from a business perspective or from the perspective of the church. How are we accomplishing, if we look at from the church, how are we accomplishing essentially the Great Commission, right? How are we going to make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? How are we teaching them everything that Jesus commanded? And how do we remind them that Christ is with them, right, every step of the way? How do we do that? How do we accomplish that? By giving them a sense of meaningfulness in the overall mission of the administration of the gospel. I think it also, this whole thing of providing meaning, if I continue in that form, it involves treating, whether it's disciples or whether it's team members. I don't like the word employees or my staff. I don't really use those terms. I say team members because I want to communicate that we're working alongside of each other. Right. But how do we treat people in a way that reinforces their kind of natural tendency to want to reciprocate what we're providing? So if I'm working alongside you and we have a goal to accomplish, how do I position it as the leader with the responsibility of leadership to make it so that you want to reciprocate the same amount of passion that I'm leading with? So all of that kind of falls under this concept of providing meaning. And I know I took a time to describe that. There was probably two other pieces. And these are things I've learned along the way from classes that I've taken or just for personal experiences. Yeah. A leader also needs to provide kind of sense of refuge or safety. So important to provide that. Do you feel like, and this is rhetorical, but do you feel like you have the freedom to engage in your job without feeling like you have to protect yourself along the way? How much can I give of myself before I feel like I have to protect myself? That's an important question, I think, to people that are on a team. And is what I do, is it going to be valued? As I essentially pour myself into something, is it going to be seen, and is it going to be cared for, and is it going to be valued? Right? So people need to have that sense of safety when they're part of a team, when they're being led. Am I going to be treated fairly? Is there going to be bias, preferential treatment for one reason or another? Because if it is, people don't engage when they feel like those things are present. So we have to provide that safety or that refuge. Is my leader going to own their own mistakes, right? Or are they going to push it off on me? And I know that sounds a little bit cynical, but I think it's happened enough times where people question those things. And again, the way a leader addresses those things, they provide that safety. The more we address those things appropriately, the more that we manage those expectations, the higher level of engagement, the higher level of commitment that comes from somebody on a team. And then finally, so we talked about, how do I provide meaning as a leader? How would I provide safety or refuge as a leader? And then do I just allow, as a leader, my team members to feel present here in their mindset? Not even just here with their hands, but with their heart and their mind. Do I give you the ability to feel present? Do I help to remove anxieties? I don't want you worrying about the things that have to be done. I want us to think about the things we get to do, if that makes sense. So how do I allow you to be consistently present in your mind and your heart while you're putting your hands to work? How do I provide that safety or refuge? And how do I provide meaningfulness to the things that you're doing? When we start talking about the types of leaders and the styles, it really traces back to really those three areas. If you can cover those areas, we can teach skill, right? But we can't teach heart. We can't teach passion. We can't teach even connection. But we can teach a skill. But how, as a leader, am I developing and creating a space where those things are present?
Yeah. You mentioned a lot of really, really good stuff. I think, right off the top, I feel the same way too. I feel like a lot of this is kind of like everything you were saying, what comes to mind, and it's a term that we use all the time in church, but we talk about like servant leadership. Yes. Right. So, and the reason why it comes to mind is because all the questions that you're asking, you're taking into consideration those that have been privileged to be able to serve, and those that you've been privileged to be able to lead and point towards, like, where that mission is or whatever the goals are. And it really sounds like a lot of servant leadership. I feel like in many senses, that isn't something necessarily, and I think we're blessed in that we do have this, we do work for, a nonprofit. We get a chance to kind of lead like, a church where I feel like maybe in a corporate world or corporate setting, things can be a little more like rougher, a little more, potentially could be a little more black and white in the sense of the way that we deal with people, individuals. Right. There's less of that kind of community. There's less of that, sense, maybe there's potentially, like I said, these are generalizations, but there might be a lot more personal gain that people are, looking for, trying to achieve. In this particular sense, like working for a nonprofit, working for a Christian organization, there is a lot more of that taken into consideration about people, where people are at, trying to understand, or trying to, like you said, kind of motivate them towards the mission, trying to get them to buy into the mission. And I feel like that's something really important, kind of jumping back onto that as well, the whole idea of like mission. So my question to you would be like, how do you inspire people to believe in the mission, right? How do we move, people past them just coming to get a paycheck? And there's nothing wrong with that. I would say that, right? Because there's nothing wrong with trying to feed your family and, and working for a good organization, but how do we create that buy-in for people, as a person in leadership, so that they can see the work that's being done and actually not just see the work, but feel a part of the work, and then also feel like they're kind of ingrained in the work?
That's a big one. I think that there's things that we have to think about in the sense of, well, I think, let me take a step back. As a leader, I think it's so important to really model, right? If I want somebody to believe in the mission, I think they have to see it somewhere. I'll take it to this Christian perspective, right? Almost at the end of every sermon that I preach, I will end it with these kind of generalized words. It's so important that you live the gospel, because you'll be the first Jesus that anybody will see, right? I remind people of that. You are the first sign of Jesus people will see. Not that God couldn't do it, but he's called us to do it,
right?
To exemplify the gospel, to exemplify his compassion, to exemplify his love. And so the average person who doesn't know Jesus will come into contact with Jesus first through you, right? So that when Jesus comes knocking on the door of their hearts, he's not a stranger, because they already met him through you.
Right.
And then your love, your compassion, your sacrifice, your redemptive spirit warms them up for what Christ will provide. And you're only doing that because Christ did that for you. So if we want people to believe in the mission of the gospel, or in the mission of the organization, or the mission of whatever we fill in the blank, we have to be cheerleaders of that thing. We have to exemplify that thing. If we look in Scripture, James says it. We'll see it a couple other places in Scripture, but don't easily assume to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Because you'll be judged more harshly, right? And that's not so much of a threat as much as it is an accountability statement. Mm-hmm. If you are somebody that's seen as a teacher or a leader, you are someone who speaks for the organization. You speak for the church. You speak for the mission. And how you carry that out speaks volumes to your own level of compassion, your own level of passion for that mission, which then draws other people in, right? If I talk about a movie like we were talking about earlier, I see a movie I really like, my level of excitement for that movie may cause somebody else to want to see that movie.
Yeah, big facts.
Right?
Yep.
My excitement for Christ may cause other people to want to know Christ. Yeah. If I love people unconditionally, it'll make them more open to understanding Christ's unconditional love. I'm not Christ, but I'm modeling Christ. Right. Like Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Because you don't know Christ yet the way I want you to know Christ, but I know him.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to imitate that until you get to know him.
Yeah.
In a way in which you don't need me as the middleman. You have your own passion for that.
Totally.
So as a leader, I think role modeling, or modeling the behavior, modeling the mission draws other people into the mission. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Right.
Asking those questions. Matthew 16, Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" Right? So that's that other side of how do we get people to kind of draw into and create a connection or a passion with the mission is self-discovery. We lead people to self-discovery, but again, we do that by we ourselves living that. Mm-hmm. And then we begin to ask people, who do you say, right? If people are around me long enough, and I think probably each of you in this space has experienced this for me, I'll ask you, how are you and Jesus doing? Right? I don't think we ask each other that question enough, but I want to give you a moment to contemplate on that thing that you're wrestling with or that you're engaging with. And when I say how are you and Jesus doing, it's not just you and the person of Jesus Christ, but it's you and Christianity and this understanding of your faith. How are you doing in your faith?
Yeah. Right?
Or as my good friend Craig Bowler had asked, how goes it with your soul?
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of a similar question.
Right.
So in a place in this position of leadership, as we draw people into a mission and get them to connect with that, it's modeling those things, and then it's challenging people with questions that matter to say, what do you believe about this mission?
Yeah.
Why do you follow this mission? I've shown it to you. You say you want to be a part of this. Why? Why do you want that? And allowing people to answer that question for themselves. Yeah. It's so important.
Yeah. What I hear you saying is, and you mentioned, James, we'll come back to that too, because I got a question for you on that too. What I hear you saying is just a lot of intentionality. Right?
Absolutely.
It's a complete thing of just being intentional about the relationships, being intentional about your own walk, the way that you present yourself, the way you present. I mean, the way yes, of course, the way you present yourself, but in a bigger sense, like the way you present Jesus, to people. Being willing to ask the questions, that are necessary, that are important. That's what I'm hearing a lot of from you, just actually going out there and being intentional. And I think that's something important, which kind of speaks to like this whole idea of like influence, right? So the reality is that every single one of us has a level of influence, of influence with our peers, influence with, with the world around us. And it would do us good to like understand that, to have that in, at least in the forefront or the back of our minds, that we have a level of influence, and that people are seeing, people are looking, people are watching the way that we act, the way that we behave, the words that come out of our mouths, the way that we react to things, the way that we present information. Like all of that is in a sense like a witness. And the way that we act, the way that we behave, it has the ability to be able to have somebody buy into the mission, into what it is that we're saying that we believe. And that's maybe from an organizational standpoint, but also from a church, standpoint. If we're living it, if we're walking it, if we're passionate about it, then I think it will, at the very least or minimum, it will have people like want to know why. I'm kind of curious.
You're touching on some things right now, and I want to jump into that a little bit more, right? Because you talk about influence, and I mentioned that earlier, and I mentioned the I won't say the antithesis to it, but somewhere in the realm of a fairly opposing concept of authority, right? You have authority and you have influence, and quite often it could be described that authority is exclusive, where influence is inclusive. And I don't mean that in a negative sense for authority, because I think there's a fine line between authority and influence, and I think they both have their place, right? When you think of a pastor, you think of a leader. Let's talk in sense of a church.
Yeah.
You want your pastor to be able to stand up and make a decision and lead you well.
Yep.
And tell us where we're going and have a plan and know where the church is going and how we're going to get there. You expect that. But you also want to be able to have a conversation with your pastor.
Yeah, for
right?
sure. Yep.
Not just somebody you see from a distance that's standing over there, but you never get a chance to meet with them. You want to be able to have coffee with your pastor just like you want them to stand up and lead the charge.
Yeah.
Right? So you want that sense of inclusivity. I want them to take charge of what's doing, but I also want them to allow me to have a place or to acknowledge. It's not even so much about allowing, but acknowledging that I have a place and something to offer. And sometimes those things can feel like they're in opposition to one another. And they're not in opposition, but they play two separate functions. You do need somebody who, I think authority allows you the place to have the right to speak. I do think we have to earn the right to speak as well, but sometimes you're positioned to have the right to speak, and what you do with that continues to validate that authority. But then there's the influence, right, where you have to be accessible, right? So if authority is leading from the front, then you have this influence that's leading from within, and those both have to be present, right? Yeah. I can't just be, for lack of better terms, everybody's friend. Although I enjoy being friendly and I enjoy being a friend, I have to know when it's time to make a decision, when it's time to take charge. Because the responsibility as the leader, the responsibility lies within my role and my authority to make a decision, to lead a charge, to have a plan, to have discernment. And if I don't show up in that place, it doesn't matter how good a friend I was to everybody. If I can't get them to the place that we are trying to go together, whether that's spiritually, whether that's professionally, or otherwise. And so those two things play a role. The challenge then becomes when one person or whatever this institution of leadership is leans too far from one side or the other.
When the balance is off.
When the balance is off. That's what creates a bit of tension. And then we begin to mismanage expectations because we've learned, well, this person is this way. So now, generally, they're always going to be this way. Right? But we have to understand that balance between the two.
Yeah, I think you said something there, and that kind of reminds me of like everybody has an opinion, but not all opinions are weighted the same. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like part of like the whole idea of like influence and all that. Like, yes, everybody has an influence, but everybody has an opinion, but just because you have an opinion doesn't mean that it should be weighted the same to other people, which kind of goes a little bit to like the whole idea of like authority, and. It's also true, I think, when it comes to like leadership. I think the one thing that for those that are in leadership and those that are being led, I think there's also that aspect of the person that is in a position of authority, they also have to bear the consequences of their decisions. And I feel like that's something that we kind of like, that can kind of be forgotten about. And that's where like one of those lines that has to be drawn, like you kind of said, like, yes, I can be your friend, we can be friends, etc. But at the end of the day, I have to make a decision, and that decision is something that I have to bear the brunt of.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and it's one of those things where you kind of like, you get to speak for people, but at the same time, like, you can also be a shield for people, right? So like your decision, in a sense, your decision making, in a sense, carries consequences, and the goal really is that you make a good decision that's going to benefit the whole. At the same time, like a decision that's well thought out and full of wisdom. That's the whole point of, I think, what is it? One of the proverbs, like in the multitude of, I think it said like kings or something, like wisdom is not lacking. In the multitude of, essentially like a group of people full of wisdom, like wisdom is not lacking.
Right.
Wisdom is present. But it's still that one person that has to be the one to speak and make a decision. That's
the challenge too. I think probably of all the roles I've played in the Army, the role of Corps officer has been the most challenging for that very reason. You have to inspire people, right, to understand their value in the economy of God, right? It's already there. We don't provide that to them. We just get to remind them of that. And at the same time, you have to take responsibility for the things that are happening. And that balance between you have a ministry, you have a mission as a soldier of the Salvation Army, as a Corps member, as somebody who's attending the church. And so it's not the Corps officer's responsibility to do all the things.
Right.
In fact, it would be irresponsible for the Corps officer to do all the things. We're transients, right? We're there for a certain amount of time, and then we're gone. Our role is to empower the people of the church.
Yeah.
And to grow the church, but empower the people of the church or the Corps to have that level of responsibility and ownership and authority of their own. And so inspiring people of that, but also at the same time being able to take charge of the role that means I have to lead. I have to kind of paint this roadmap, create this direction forward. And I had people say, "Oh, we ought to do this. I think you should do this." And I said, "Well, when are you ready to do this?"
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And, but you're the pastor. And I remind people, you and I have the same rights and privileges to the gospel. Right? We are a kingdom of priests.
Yeah.
So in that sense, we have the same level of responsibility and ownership to the gospel. I just have a higher level of assigned responsibility. And so certain decisions that come to me, I will have to make, sometimes in a vacuum, because I'm going to have to take all the responsibility and heat if this thing doesn't go right. Right. So at the end of the day, the final question comes to me. The final responsibility comes to me. The final consequence would even come to me. So there's certain decisions I will have to make. And so weighing that understanding and how much I assert because of that, but also understanding the other half of the responsibility for me is the administration of the gospel to the church, the administration and development of leadership within the church, right? And then how the administration of the gospel goes outside of the church and evangelism. All of that plays a role. And that's a hard thing to navigate. How much do you do? How much do you lead? How much do you inspire? It could drive a person crazy sometimes. Yeah. And which is why boundaries are so important and being able to understand those things as well.
For sure. So that's funny. So in your guys' job description, do you guys also, it sounds like you guys also get the all other duties as assigned. You guys get that as well?
Well, that is the description.
That's the whole job.
The description is
just the one
all
line.
All duties as assigned.
Just one line.
And you know what? And that's what we signed up for.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't know to the degree. I will be fully honest with you. I don't know that any person going into officership really truly understands the degree of responsibility that goes with that. It is every duty as assigned, because you can show up one day and have no idea, right, what's coming. You can plan as much as you want, and you ought to plan. I think the Holy Spirit truly honors preparation. But I think the Holy Spirit also exists in a way that can counsel and advocate and direct you in the times where you didn't even know it was coming.
Yeah.
Right? For example, I had just come home from an EDS deployment, and Lisa and I had a plan to do X, Y, and Z in the next 2 to 3 days. I got home. I couldn't wait to see my family. I was gone for 2 weeks, and I just wanted to spend time with my wife and my kids. About an hour after I got home, Lisa got a phone call from one of our core members. Was going into the hospital and was going to have a baby. Mm-hmm. And the husband, for whatever reason, wasn't present in his mind or in his heart. And Lisa needed to go be with this core member. We had plans for what was needing to happen, and those plans had to shift. She had to be flexible enough to say, we're going to pivot, and I'm going to do this. She ended up holding this woman's leg while she gives birth to her baby.
Yeah.
Right? That's not in the job description.
Yeah, right.
Right? You are, adjacently part of the delivery process.
Yeah.
That's not part of the written job description.
Right.
But it is part of our responsibility. It's part of our duties as assigned.
Yeah.
And that's just one example. There's a million different things.
Sure.
So that is the job description. It is that line, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to serve.
Right.
And it's my privilege to do so. My coffee mug. Can you believe we get to do this?
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
Whatever this is, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
But we get to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we signed up for it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You said some really, really cool stuff. Like I often reference that same thing that you already mentioned, but like I think we'd be able to, the church as a whole would be able to have even a greater effect if we truly believe the whole idea of like the priesthood of all believers.
Yes.
Like just the knowledge of like, dude, you are empowered like by God to go out, be a priest, go out, pray for people, love people, serve people, preach to people, advocate for, for people, etc. Like if we all truly believed that and we walked in that,
right.
like the world would just flip on its head. Really.
Can I add an uncomfortable piece to that?
Yeah, go for it.
We're not only empowered to do it, we're commanded to do it. Mm-hmm. We're commanded to do this.
Yeah. Right?
All power and authority has been given to me, Jesus said.
Yeah.
Therefore, go. Right? This is not an option for a disciple.
Right.
We're all called to leadership.
Yeah.
Different levels of leadership. And then, there's leaders above leaders and leaders above leaders because we have different responsibilities. But none of us rides the bench. We are all called to that.
Yeah.
And I think that's not something that's, so popular in society today, being told you have to do something. But if I've made a commitment to Christ, this is my get to and my have to.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is my duty, my responsibility, but it's also my delight.
Yeah.
That I get to do those things. But we are commanded to do those things. And sometimes from a place of discipline, which, is a parallel word to disciple, in a sense of discipline, we definitely are encouraged and empowered to do so, but we are also commanded to do so. Right? We've got to stand forward. So we take that position of leadership from one degree or another when we put ourselves in a position of being a disciple of Jesus Christ. We're commanded to do that. And maybe that command can be empowering, right? When somebody trusts you with something so great and so beautiful, that command is also a blessing to you. You would trust me with the gospel? You would trust me with the continuance of the faith? There's a concept, I couldn't date it back to an exact time, but we'll look at kind of generalized at the time of kings, not even biblical kings. But there's a concept that says the man sent by the man is the man, right? And so, if somebody of authority, a king, sends out their messenger, when they arrive to the place to deliver the message, they don't represent themselves, even they represent the king.
The king, yeah.
They represent the sender.
Yeah, he's the guy.
Right?
Yeah.
I get to share this message. I'm also commanded to share this message, and I'm sharing it as if it was the very king himself sharing that message. So from a perspective of leadership, that needs to be the role both of the leader and of, quote unquote, the follower. We are being sent. We've been commanded. We've been encouraged. We've been empowered. And we have the privilege of sharing a message on behalf of the king. And I think if we took it that way, now we're talking about this empowerment and this passion with which we share it. I would be so entrusted with a message from the King himself that I get to be representative of that King as if he was standing right there.
Yeah.
Now to take it step forward to the business sense, as well as in the church leadership, I think leaders have to remember that concept too. I represent more than just myself. Mm-hmm. It's not just my style of leadership that I need to be concerned with. What's the bigger picture?
Yeah.
How are the people that I get to lead, how do they need to be led? It's not just that, well, I like it this way, so that's how it's going to be.
Right.
What's there for the greater good and for the greater whole, because I represent something larger than myself. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when you come from that place, that position of like you said, we're commanded to do this. We're commanded to preach the gospel, mm-hmm. make disciples of all nations. But then also we get to do this. We look at it from the lens of it being a privilege. I think the amazing part is that you end up doing it better.
Right.
If you have the perspective of like, this is a privilege. This is something that has been given to me, gifted to me. It's been awarded to me mm-hmm.
by
God's grace. Not that I earned it by myself, but like, yeah, that He would entrust me
mm-hmm.
to do this. Like, if you have that perspective, you do it. You end up doing it. I think as a natural byproduct, you end up doing it better.
Yeah, you do. You do. It's a perspective. You put that word out there perfectly, right? Romans says 12. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, right? Don't do it the way the world would do it, right. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind, right? Change your perspective.
Yeah.
If you really want to take that next step, you've got to adjust that perspective that you have. And then when you're able to do that, you do it better, right? And you're able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will.
Yeah.
When we change that perspective, we're doing it better because the motivation is better, right? So if the motivation is not correct, the outcomes aren't correct.
Yeah.
If that's not what was ever intended to be, we have to go back to the motivation and say, what is my motivation for doing and being the things that I'm doing and being? And at the end of the day, in this concept of leadership, and we'll call it the burden of the church, we all get to be leaders.
Mm-hmm.
We all get to be leaders.
Yeah.
No one's left behind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I'm taking a really quick break from this episode just to remind you that if you're enjoying this conversation or any of the other conversations that we've had on this podcast, to go ahead and give us a share, like the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, and pass it along to other people you know will be able to benefit and will enjoy this. Also, I want to remind you that you can follow us across all social platforms at SoCal Division. That's at SoCal Division. There you'll be able to find a lot of really good content, so be sure to give us a follow. All right, back to the episode. Okay, so here's my question.
Okay.
So we talked about how everybody's, the priesthood of all believers. You mentioned this already,
mm-hmm.
Specifically about James's, word of warning, caution.
Yeah.
So, and I want to read it here too. You said it already. It's James 3:1. It says, "Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly." So we see that he's giving a word of warning,
mm-hmm.
kind of saying, talking to people and saying like, hey, you should be very cautious, very aware of the fact that you have a lot of power, a lot of influence. If you're a teacher, you have to basically know what it is what you're talking about, or else essentially you could lead people astray.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you is, how do you go about encouraging, but then also, I'm going to use the word discouraging people, potentially, in a sense, from seeking higher forms of leadership,
mm-hmm.
because that may not be their place, I suppose, or that may not be something that they should be seeking out. And it's tough because I think you have to do both roles. You have to encourage. Obviously, we're here to encourage, but at the same time, as a pastor, I'm assuming you also have the role of being able to tell somebody I get you want to do this, whatever that thing may be, but that's not really, I believe, your calling. You're not displaying the natural fruits or characteristics of this is the thing that you should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about that. How do you go about that?
That's a good question, and there's two parts I want to tackle. I'll tackle the scripture second.
Okay.
But to answer that question, although it's part of the overall context of the scripture, I'm happy to tell people manage your expectations. I really am, because I think you said rock the boat a little bit. Let's rock the boat. Let's rock the boat, okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to rock the boat with the Salvation Army a little bit because this is where we're at.
Let's go.
I think we are dangerously guilty of promoting officership as the highest or one and only calling. I think we have been dangerously guilty of that in the Salvation Army. I don't know that that's been the intention, but I think often that's been the outcome. In the way that we promote officership, in the way, even at all the events that we do, things of that nature. And I don't think it's the highest calling. And I think the calling that God places on your life is the highest calling for you.
Yeah, whatever that may be.
Whatever that may be.
Yeah.
So if he's calling you to lay leadership, then officership is not the role you should be in.
Right.
Right? If he's calling you to officership, then missions is not the calling you ought to be in.
Yeah.
You have to know between you and the Lord what that calling is. And I think that you have to understand that calling. You need to ask God for what that calling is. You need to be able to articulate that calling and why you feel like you've been called to that. And I think the church has to confirm that as well. And finally, there needs to be evidence of that calling being lived out in your life.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge piece. And I'm okay with telling people, not even so much telling, I question. I ask people questions that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you feel called to this, whatever this is? And I want people to be able to articulate that. My wife and I, Lisa and I, were candidate secretaries, DY assistant candidate secretaries for almost 6 years. And we sat with a number of people. I think in our time we sent about 44 people to training in those years. Mm-hmm. And I asked every one of them, why? Mm-hmm. Why do you want to be an officer? And for so many of them, I'd say to them, if you permit me to be so honest, I think you just want to be a good soldier. Mm. All the things you mentioned about why you wanted to be an officer, I think what you're just saying is you'd love the opportunity to be a really good soldier. And if we're continuing to rock the boat, I think sometimes as officers, we get so caught up in the doing that we don't give enough opportunities for our people to do. And I think maybe sometimes they feel like that's the only way that they'd be able to do it.
Oh,
is to be the officer.
Yeah.
Because they want to be heavily involved in ministry and in some of those traditional aspects and areas. Yeah. And I think we have time to cultivate that with our people.
Yeah.
But sometimes there's so many responsibilities to it that we really just want people to I'm trying to figure out the right word. I know we want them to grow, but sometimes we get so caught up in the responsibilities and the administration of those responsibilities that we end up as officers just taking them all on ourselves.
Yeah.
Instead of encouraging and empowering people to take on some of those roles.
Yeah.
We don't have to do all of it.
Right.
But because there's so much responsibility behind it and there's so much weighing in on it that we're not able to really jump into that. And I think that's a big challenge for us. So we have to allow people the place in ministry where they can participate. But in my experience, I'm not saying this is overwhelmingly always the case, but in my experience, a lot of folks who were saying they wanted to be officers just really wanted to be good soldiers and didn't feel like they had the opportunity to do that. Now, that's rocking the boat a little bit. I do believe people are called to officership.
Sure, of course.
I know that I was called to officership.
Yes.
I felt a specific calling. I could recall that to you.
Yeah.
And all the steps that I mentioned, I know that this is what God had for me.
Yeah.
And I think that is the case for so many people. But I think there's a lot of others as well who feel like this is what's highlighted, this is what's promoted, this is what's available, this is what allowed me to do the things that I'd really like to do in my core. And so it sometimes feels like it's the only route to do any kind of ministry.
To do anything.
Is to be an officer.
Yeah.
So I think that's rocking the boat a little bit. I think, you also kind of, just to touch back on what you were sharing about how do I share that with folks in terms of how do I have that open and honest conversation about maybe this isn't for you?
Yeah.
I don't have a smooth, clean technique about doing that. I just like honest communication.
Yeah.
I like to use the term managing expectations because mismanaged expectations lead down the path we don't want to go. You mismanage expectations, right? It leads to disappointment to bitterness, bitterness to hardness of heart to divorce or separation. And so all of that can be avoided if we're just clear. Now, clear and kind, but clear. And being able to articulate why I feel that way. If I think somebody's living within a calling that maybe it's not best for them, I need to be able to share that and to share why I think that's the case.
Yeah.
But I want to be honest with them. Now, if somebody still feels convicted to do that, then, I walk alongside of them. And sometimes self-discovery is the best tool possible. But I don't have any kind of scientific formula for telling people this is not the best for them.
Yeah.
I just tell them, hey, I don't think this is wonderful for you.
Right.
And here's why I think that.
Yeah.
And then I asked that same question I mentioned before, like same question Jesus asked in Matthew 16. How do you see it?
Right.
Articulate that for me. Why do you think this is the direction you ought to go? I do want to jump back to that James verse, though.
Okay. Really quick, let me just say something real quick. So essentially, like you mentioned something pretty interesting. You said sometimes people, because they want to serve, they're well-intentioned, they want to share that desire to serve, but if they don't get the opportunity to do so at a local, like say the local church, then their natural thought is, well, I need to be a pastor, I need to be a core officer in order for me to do it, which is really interesting because I'd never thought about it that way, but that makes a lot of sense. But essentially, you could be helping these individuals by actually allowing them to serve, like you said, like locally in a specific area. And they may realize, oh, this isn't necessarily this isn't for me, I suppose. So in a sense, like you kind of can filter out some of that, right? But then also you could also tap into the other pool of like, if you give people opportunity to serve, then it'll confirm some calling in people's lives. Yeah.
You know what? This is something I want to do. I didn't even know that. I want to be a pastor, or I want to be a core officer in Salvation Army lingo.
Right.
And I think that's a huge piece to be aware of and acknowledge. There was a time in my officership, in my ordination, in which I remember getting an email from our leadership that said something along the lines of, you can't use the word pastor on your business card. And it wasn't an admonishment for using the word pastor. We're very much pastors.
Yes, right.
But as a Salvation Army officer, you are more than a pastor. You do a lot more than a traditional pastor does. Our role encompasses way more than that. We also get to share the gospel. We also get to lead a congregation. Yeah. But it's bigger than that. I remember taking offense to that at one point. Like, what do you mean I can't use pastor? I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
The more I've matured in my officership and the longer I've been an officer, I understand more that my ordination from the ecumenical sense is just a portion of my overall role. Yeah. I'm in nonprofit management. I am a business leader. The list goes on. I oversee HR and PR and finance and business and property and so on and so forth at any given location that I'm given stewardship over. I'm not just a pastor. And I think for us, it was to help us manage the expectations. Yeah. Right? So as people were looking at this calling on their lives for full-time ministry as a Salvation Army officer, I wanted to show them the depth and breadth of what it is that we do. You say you want to do this? Let me show you all that this has to offer. Right. And if you still feel like this is what you want to do, let's get it. Yeah. Let's do it. Yeah. But my responsibility is to show them the full picture, right, of what is expected. Yeah. And I think that's a huge piece to it as well, managing expectations. Yeah. And
it kind of so you use the word twice, you said we talked about calling. Yes. And then we also talk about wanting. Yes. Right? So in the sense of, let's say being a pastor, core officer, I've heard both sides. I've heard people say this is something that I felt God has called me to do. And then I've also heard some really good, pastors, officers that are like, I wanted to do this. So therefore I'm here because I really felt like I wanted to do this, take on this responsibility, be a part of the organization to this degree and to this depth. Yeah. Would you say both are fine?
I do. I would say both are fine. Okay. Really. And I think because there's an origin to the desires of our hearts as well. Right? My will ought to mimic the will of the Lord in my life. Right.
If you're surrendered.
If I'm surrendering, right? And so I would hope that the desires I have for ministry would come from a place of Christ fulfilling those things in my life. Yeah. I'll be quite honest. I don't know that I wanted to be an officer initially. I felt called to be an officer. Yeah. I wanted to go make money. And I was doing that already.
Money's nice.
Right? Money is nice. It pays for things, pays for things, And it was bigger than just a desire to want to make money. I grew up without a lot, right? And I grew up in a circumstance and in a community where struggle was apparent. and the measure of having made it, quote unquote, making it, surrounded being able to make a certain amount of money, be able to provide a certain amount of things for yourself, so much that you would have a level, let's say, of authority and influence. And I had achieved those things, and I was living within that in my professional career outside of the Salvation Army, outside of ministry. And so when God called me to this, I didn't really understand what was happening because I had already been on a journey, and I thought that's where I was supposed to go. Now I understand deeply our God is a God of transition. He's a God of change, and He knows exactly where He's taking us and how we're getting there, and the things that we've done before that prepared us for the transition and the change that He's providing. And so I don't dislike and I don't not want what I have. I love it with my whole entire heart, and I'm happy that I'm doing it. But initially, when He revealed that to me, I was like, come on, God. There's also been times, full transparency, I've not wanted this since I've been it.
Yeah.
Like there's times when I could just leave officership, and I was just over it, frustrated. I think any officer that's been an officer has gone through enough to someday say, I wanted to let this go. And I asked God, can I be released from this? And I never got an affirming answer. And so no matter what I wanted, I committed to this covenant and this calling, and I believe so heavily in it that I didn't think again about walking away from it. Right?
Yeah.
Because He didn't give me the permission to do so. Just as He called me into it, I feel like He would release me from it if that was His will for my life. And I don't believe that it has been.
Yeah.
And I'm not living in this, sad, like I have to keep doing this thing I don't want to do. I'm happy to do what I'm doing.
Totally.
But there have been moments, if I'm being fully honest, where I was like, I could go do something else.
Right.
And God's like,
He hasn't asked for the Toyota Sienna keys back yet.
No, He has not.
Yeah, He's like, no, you still keep them. You still got
exactly.
You still got some work to do.
So
yeah, I think that's
I like to be transparent about that.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I think that's a part of like the other aspect of leadership too. I've been at that same place. Obviously, I'm not a pastor, but the same place, like in terms of like ministry and different things where. Yeah, I've gone up to my pastor and be like, I'm done with this music stuff. I'm done leading worship. Like, I'm just tired. I'm burned out. It just is what it is. Plenty of moments where I was ready to just toss it all in. And in some weird way, at the right moment, at the right time, God was like, nah, not yet.
Not yet.
There's still more work, work to do, work for you to do. So, I feel that. So, okay, James. Yeah. James 3.
So go back to that passage you read, right?
Okay, here we go.
Because you read James 3, which verse?
3:1.
Right. So just start that from the beginning again.
Okay, so what I'm reading here is, not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly.
Now keep going a little bit. Just a little bit more.
All right.
If you can.
Let me see. Ruben, can you pull that up? James 3:1. I only got this one verse. And,
okay.
And then there's some commentary afterwards.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a fuller picture that comes up, right? There's some things even before it that are being spoken about. There's some things that come after it that I think it's important just to consider.
Yeah.
And it's not simply just about this concept of becoming a teacher, right? There's reasons behind it.
Yeah. Okay.
Look at you.
A pro presenter over here?
Yeah. Are you able to catch the next verse? Yeah. We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. One more. When we put bits in the mouths of horses, we make them obey us. We can turn the whole animal. Okay, so we'll stop there. If you keep reading, it goes along the same lines. And so it starts out with not easily assuming to be a teacher. You'll be judged more harshly. And then the next sequence of verses are all about this.
Gossip in the tongue and everything.
It's about our tongue. It's about the words that come out of our mouth and the intentionality with which we speak. And I think that's a huge piece that we have to understand is we represent something bigger than ourselves. And the words that come from our mouth, the way in which we speak, the way in which we direct, the way in which we lead, that was so much about what James was talking about. Yes, the larger concept of leadership and creating a space that is meaningful and creating a space that is safe, creating a space of engagement, yes. Being honorable and self-control and all of those things in our leadership, yes.
Yeah.
But the first step to that are the words of our mouths reflecting the role of responsibility in our leadership.
Yeah.
what we say, the things that we say, the things that we do, they make such a huge difference in who we are. And I think, I mentioned earlier about leaders owning their mistakes. And I think just to continue into that, I think staff, disciples, whoever it is from a church or business standpoint, as you're leading, I think people look for clues as to whether it's safe for them to be silent and when to speak up. And so much of that is based off the words that come out of your mouth. What are the things that you, as a leader, what are the things that you promote? What are the things that you speak about? What do you give attention to? Mm-hmm. The words of your mouth direct the flow of the mission, directs the flow of obedience, directs the flow of sacrifice. Mm-hmm. So as a leader, we have to know that our words matter.
Right.
The things that we say matter. We know that because this podcast is happening right now, and people are going to be listening to the words that we're saying.
Right.
I don't get to show my actions as a leader, so to speak, in this context.
Right.
All we have in the context of this podcast are my words. Mm-hmm. And so they have to be chosen appropriately because the words that I speak have the power to influence, have the power to encourage, also have the power to discourage. Mm-hmm. Even in those kind of spicy topics that we talk about and the things that are like, let's shake things up a little bit.
Yeah.
I still need to be mindful, still transparent, but mindful of the words that I'm saying,
right? Because
my words matter.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big piece about what James is talking about. When we talk about our leadership, our words, the way that we guide and direct mean so much. Lisa and I used to joke around that we really got to be cautious of our words, right? Because we learned that as pastors, people take our words differently. Even friends that we have receive our words differently because we also have a dual role as a pastor, not just their friend.
Both right.
So if I'm like, we're joking with somebody and I'm like, that was dumb, right? If Anthony, their friend, said that was dumb, we just kind of joke and we laugh.
Yeah.
But if Anthony, their friend, who's also their pastor, said that's dumb, now my pastor thinks what I did or said was dumb.
Yeah, it's going to
which means
different.
God thinks what I said or did was dumb, right? I know that sounds extreme and drastic, but we've seen that kind of psychology take form in the minds of people. And Lisa and I said, man, we have to really, like, even the way we joke with certain people, the level of influence that we have might, sway them one way or another. Yeah. And dare I say, the level of influence that we have, the words I say, the things I do might give people permission. So something that I say in a moment of, not in a formal place of leadership and pastoral, what have you, but just in casual conversation that I'm having with friends.
Yeah.
If I talk about a certain thing or I joke a certain way, I'm giving permission for people to say, well, this representative of God said I could talk about these things in this manner. So we have to be cautious even about our words, which is an ever constant process.
Yeah,
right?
that's probably until the day we all,
absolutely
are 6 feet under. I think it's going to be always the challenge for sure. All right, cool. Here, well, I'll just ask maybe like a final question here, and maybe I'm gonna try to sandwich 2 in 1.
Do it.
All right. So really quick, from your experience, like what are some undue burdens, expectations that we have of leaders? Like what are some things that, me, if I'm one of your, congregants, what are some expectations maybe that you've experienced that people have on you guys that are not, that are undue, that are not fair, or unrealistic, if you would. And then the other thing is too, like, how do we handle like conflict management? If you can just maybe give a quick summary of like, what's a good way of like handling conflict? If I'm a congregant, what's a good way for me to be able to approach it, right? Because we're talking about like being able to, if we're all on the same, kind of like playing field. I have to be able to, if I see something wrong, right, I should be able to come up to you and be able to say like, hey, Anthony, you know what I mean? Like I kind of witnessed something, maybe it didn't sit well with me. Just consider it.
Okay.
Consider it. What's a good way of being able to kind of approach that, right?
Yeah.
Because it should go both ways, I feel like.
It should.
In a sense, right? Especially if we're, brothers, in Christ, or we're trying to be accountable to one another. Like there should be some level of reciprocity in that sense.
We'll start with the level of expectation. What is the expectation, right? I think that people ought to have the mindset and be reminded that people in ministry, especially pastors, for Salvation Army lingo, corps officers or just officers, people think that we don't live the normal life that everybody else lives. Like, we still have the normal challenges. We still have the normal struggles. And sometimes I think people lose sight of the fact that we are still living life while we're also directing the ministry. Right. And so one of those unrealistic expectations is that we don't have real life going on, and we do. Right. And so our level of availability sometimes is augmented by that. You know, I know you probably want to see me about something, but my son has a game today, and I want to be present for my child. Right. I know that there may have been a need in this area, but my daughter is having a struggle in school that I need to be present for her. In this moment, right? This is a season that we're going through. There's a struggle, you know. In our first appointment, we really dealt with the tail end of the struggle with infertility that Lisa and I were going through for 4.5 years, and we had some folks in our congregation that were having children, and dare I say, even in some cases, what would be considered irresponsibly, just having child after child after child. And we were expected constantly to be celebratory in our hearts about that. And we were as best we knew how. But at the same time, we are wrestling with this concept of God, why won't you bless us with the one thing we've been asking for and praying for? And God, like, we've been doing all the right things. And dare I say, we were saying, God, where's our reward for our obedience? Meanwhile, you have these folks over here, and they're just dropping kid after kid after kid. Right. And we wrestle with that, and I think people don't expect us to wrestle with things, but we do. Those are unfair expectations that we won't wrestle with the challenges of life. I think an unfair expectation is that we have somehow more hours in a day than everybody else does. We don't. We don't have more hours. We have the same 24 hours everybody else has. And arguably at times, and everybody's going through things, but arguably at times, we are unexpectedly needed in a certain area. You know, chances are you're not going to get called in the middle of the night to go be with somebody who's delivering a baby. Easily, chances are we could be. You know, we all suffer loss and death. There were a lot of people. I went to a funeral this weekend. A lot of people were at that funeral. They all got the call the same way I did, the same time I did, and are all grieving as I did. I don't want to take anything away from those people. But I had the extra added privilege, but also challenge of not just grieving and going to a funeral, but having to conduct and officiate this funeral while grieving. The average person doesn't have that. So the way I respond and the availability I have and things like that will be different based on the level of responsibility that I have in the ministry. Does that make sense?
It does make a lot of sense,
And so there's times where there's unfair expectations on pastors and people in ministry. Because we have to be all things to all people.
Totally, I asked the question just as, because of that fact that there's so many different hats that you guys have to wear, you guys have to put on. I'm sure there's a moment where, as you're, like you said, you're in grieving, you have to almost take yourself out of it.
Yes, you do.
And then you have to put on the different hat. And then you have to deliver the message of, you know, a message of hope, a message of you know, encouragement, you know, whatever you can kind of like muster to try to provide comfort. So it's almost, you have to take yourself out of it, put a different part of yourself into it, and then you know, kind of like step into that role. So just really my kind of point with that question is just so that we can get a better understanding of of who you.
And that's just a small snippet, right? We could spend a whole podcast just on that. On managing expectations that people have with ministry 100%. Leaders and vice versa. Right, which then kind of morphs itself into that conversation of conflict. When I do have that expectation, or if I do feel like there's tension, how do I, as a church member or as a business partner or whatever, speak to their leader or to their pastor? How do we address conflict? And I will submit this. I think in every case, not everybody would agree with me, but I think the ownership of responsibility lies with the leader. To have a place of understanding first and clarity. That doesn't mean the fault lied with the leader, but I think as a leader, sometimes we got to go first. Right? So if you have an issue, even if I don't think it's valid, I need to take a moment and make it valid. I need to validate the issue you have. I need to acknowledge it, right? Whether you come to me in a way that's civil or not, from a perspective of leadership, I need to take a deep breath and say, let me figure out a way to de-escalate this moment. Because as the leader, the power in the room sits with me.
Right.
Right? So the level of sacrifice should be mine first. Right? Because you're coming with the need. And I hold the power, so to speak, right? I don't want anybody watching this to put too much into that word.
Right.
But just understanding the dynamics, right? You're coming to me because you have an issue with me for something I've done. As a leader, my level of authority, influence, needs to be played into my response to that. Now, if I'm addressing something, I always have to figure out, like, how do I address the root of the issue and not just the result? I want to get down to the root issue. So the responsibility of the leader is to take a step back for a minute and say, what's the root cause of this thing? And how do I best diffuse this in a manner that's going to maintain the integrity of everybody involved in the conversation?
Yeah.
That's the burden, dare I say, of the leader.
Yeah.
Is to be the one that has to exhibit the maturity in the situation. Not that the other person is not, but I have to go first.
Sure. Yeah.
I've got to take the first step in making that sacrifice. I've got to be the first person to exhibit that level of humility, because the power dynamic requires that I do so to make sure that you're seen and to maintain the integrity of this institution of leadership to begin with. So that root versus result. I need to work towards a common outcome in the conversation. I need to care about your goals and your interests and values. And if I'm confident enough in who I am as a leader, me doing that for you doesn't diminish my leadership. It rises up your level so that we're seeing eye to eye.
Yeah.
I want your confidence to be where it is. I want to validate where you're at. I want you to know that your words matter and that I hear them and that we can diffuse this conflict together. Sometimes we do have to draw boundaries, though. I think that's a challenge. I've had times in my ministry where I don't know that there was an easy way to diffuse a situation that was happening. And sometimes we just had to draw a boundary. And I just had to tell people, hey, honestly, for the benefit of both of us, I don't think this conversation is productive. And I want it to be productive, and I don't want to undermine either of our integrities. We either have to table this for a little bit, or we have to find out a different approach.
Sure.
But I need this to be productive.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? But approaching conflict, at the end of the day, I still think we have to address it head on. We have to be able to speak openly with one another.
Yeah.
And I'll speak you to me. If you have a concern with something I've done, prior to this instance, my hope is that I have instilled enough safety and meaningfulness, right, and value in you so that you know that you can come to me with anything, and that it's not going to be a thing. Right? If that hasn't happened, a good chunk of that conflict, it's already lost. Because you're not coming to me with that confidence, right? You're not coming to me with that safety that you can say anything you need to say, that I would receive that. So solving conflict starts way before the conflict ever comes. Right?
Yep.
It's the community that we've built and established with one another way before any conflict ever happened.
Right.
That's the burden and the beauty of leadership. How do I establish these institutions of community way before there's ever a challenge? So when there is a challenge, we can go into that in a way that becomes amenable for all of us. Relationships.
Relationships.
Going through those stages, right?
Going through them.
From introduction to acquaintance to friendship to fellowship and finally intimacy, right? And how have we grown through that? Those stages of relationships to where we're known to one another in such a way that conflict is just another way to grow stronger.
Totally.
Right? Encouragement. Accountability becomes a form of encouragement. That's what we need.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like a lot of times conflict, if you can get past it, it's almost like a type of it just projects you or pushes you forward deeper into relationship with people.
Absolutely.
Like if you're able to get past it, if you're able to have conflict, because we're different people, we're different individuals, we're gonna have differences of opinions, different approaches that we take, and it doesn't really matter who you are. I feel like, I mean, even as married individuals, some of the people that I love the most, my son, the person that I love the most, I'm sure we're going to have conflict in the future. You know what I mean? And that's just a part of life. It is what it is. But it's about, can we move past this? Can we move past these kind of like hurdles and challenges? And if you do, you realize that the depth of friendship, of love, only grows deeper. It's almost like you're just kind of you're digging deeper in love, really, and you're planting and you're growing together. There's this thing, as you're talking about like ownership. There's a book I read. It's called Extreme Ownership. It's by this guy named Jocko Willink, and his whole idea is like, it doesn't matter who you are. Like as a leader, your responsibility, your job is to take complete ownership whenever something doesn't work out. Yeah. Extreme ownership, even if it's something that you directly yourself did, even if it's your team, whoever it is, like it's your responsibility to take extreme ownership of that stuff. And he details this whole thing of when they were out in Afghanistan. He was doing a tour out there, and there was some miscommunication between some of his operators, and they ended up kind of getting friendly fire, right? And then luckily nobody died as far as I remember in the whole thing. But I mean, they came to him and they're like, okay, well, what happened? Where did this all take place? Like, who's responsible? He's like, well, clearly it was my operator that miscalculated. He said, but while yes, he didn't send the right coordinates, pinpoint the right things. The real responsibility lies on me,
right? Because
I should have been doing a better job of double checking, making sure that everything was okay. Our communication should have been a lot better between us, between headquarters, between operator as well as like leader, etc. So he's like, yeah, well, that happened. The reality is, when they end up debriefing, they asked him like, well, who's responsible? And he stood up and said, I'm responsible.
Yep.
Because I should have basically taken better care, been more in the details in terms of my team, and it shifted the entire that entire atmosphere of that debriefing thing that they were having there. It became all about like, okay, well, how can we solve this moving forward?
Right.
And it was as a result of that, somebody just taking extreme ownership of it, of this stuff. So, so I think this is a really good spot. I think we landed in a really good place. I want to ask you though, is there anything else, final word you want to say about this topic or about anything else that we discussed?
No, I think, this is a topic that there should be continuous conversation about, because this concept of leadership is not just black and white. There's a lot of gray in between, and who gets to be a leader. And I think in some right or another, we all are called to be leaders, right? It depends on the environment. It depends on the circumstance and the situation. But we all have to play the role of a leader and a follower and a disciple.
Right.
And understanding that there's a beautiful link between the two, and it's okay to play both roles, to be a servant leader, right?
Yeah.
There's times where I'm called to stand forward, and there's times where I have to kind of step back and understand the needs of those with and around me, so that I can execute the mission, the calling, with integrity, with grace. I think that's such a huge piece. We got to do it with grace.
Yeah.
And I think when we do that, we find like the true motivation behind what God was calling us to in the first place. Right? It's all about just moving community forward. I tell people that just take God with you, right? Have him with you. Have him accompany what you do every day. And I don't think we can lose when we go that route.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks, Anthony. Thanks for jumping on the episode.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, we'll have to definitely do it one more time.
Absolutely.
How about next time we do over some barbecue?
Love it. I'm ready. We'll make it happen.
Okay, for sure. Yeah. So thanks for tuning in. And like always, go ahead and be sure to follow us at SoCal Division across all platforms. And also give this episode a share. Share the podcast with your friends, family. These are really good, important conversations we're having. And that's it. Anthony, do you want to give out any of your social media stuff in case people want to follow you, or are you just
nobody's trying to follow me, man? We're all good. But Mr. Barnes 76 at all platforms.
There we go.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. Until next time.
Thank you so much.
All right. Peace.